This training series for principals is presented by NCPAPA, NCASLD, the Department of Public Instruction, and Education NC. Stick around after the lesson for discussions on the topics we'll cover today.
An academic coach, just like a sports coach, that person has such a unique skill set that really can inspire and motivate and encourage our teachers, not only to improve their daily practice, but to also stay in the field of education. We really want to help shape and grow our teachers and to help their love for education to continue forward. And the way that we can do that is through coaching. So I hope during this time you will glean some information about the difference between coaching and evaluating and how both of those work together to really shape our teachers and to improve them and to support them as they continue in their practice.
Hi, I'm Don Ramsour.
And I'm Seth Brown. Let's start today's lesson with a question. What color is this stop sign?
Red, right?
Well, my colorblind uncle says it's green, almost a greenish brown. This is what it looks like to him. So is my uncle wrong? After all, this is actually what he sees when observing the same stop sign as you. Today we're talking about feedback and coaching. But first, we need to understand something fundamental. Everyone comes to discussions with a different perspective because your own lens and your own biases shape how you see the truth.
It is important to have humility when observing a teacher and giving feedback. You might be so focused on one aspect that you miss other valid points of view.
Let's explore 3 assumptions that can frame how you think critically about giving feedback. These are from an article by Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall in the Harvard Business Review. The first is acknowledging that your source of truth is not the only one. Everyone sees the world differently. Think of the stop sign. You should ask your teachers how they think they're doing with remote learning, and keep your mind open to possibilities you hadn't thought of. Their responses will help you determine their truth, which is their starting point in the conversation. Knowing this increases your odds of understanding each other and finding the points where they genuinely need help. It helps ensure your time with them is well spent. Perhaps most importantly, it helps you get to know your teachers better as human beings. Think about when feedback has been given to you in the past. It's easy to focus too much on the negative parts. Likewise, how many times have you tried to fix a weakness in a teacher's pedagogy by pointing out a specific failure of theirs? This theory finds that feedback is actually more productive when it focuses on a teacher's strengths rather than their weaknesses. Highlighting past failures can feel more threatening than supportive. Instead, focus on building the strengths or skills that encourage new successes. For example, let's say your teacher had a student who lost interest during a Zoom call. Rather than dwelling on this specific student with the teacher, your feedback could focus on general ways to keep the class engaging. Find something engaging the teacher did and encourage more of that. Our third strategy is to consider what excellence looks like for each teacher and build your feedback around that. Keep in mind that excellence is individualized. Each teacher has unique capabilities, but your job isn't to compare them. It's to help each one be better than they were yesterday. Just to be clear, we are not saying to ignore any shortcomings. Data that shows shortcomings are data that need to be explored, but how you do that exploration will determine the true growth and learning of your teachers.
And remember, don't assume you already know what needs to be poured into their heads. Ask them first, just to ensure you don't miss the mark.
We have teachers that are teaching online, teachers that are teaching face-to-face. So as a school, what we've done for those online teachers, we created a school-wide Zoom list of all of their links. So at any time we could pop into those classrooms, support those teachers in any manner. And so we have a walkthrough form that we've used. We revamped that walkthrough form to target our online environment, but instruction is the same. Face-to-face or online, good teaching is good teaching. And so what we do is we use that same walkthrough form. We go in and out of their Zoom online classes. I just make sure that that feedback is consistent and it is immediate for our teachers. So as soon as I leave a room or I leave a Zoom lesson, I make it a point to reach out and touch that teacher. If it's going down to that classroom and saying, hey, I noticed you did this today on your Zoom lesson, try this tomorrow. I saw this in another class, or just even talking through the lesson with them, how they felt about the lesson, that reflection piece, that has been the most beneficial thing because we're all learning. And so just that immediate, consistent, on-time feedback for teachers, that has been very beneficial.
Too often, feedback is given with good intentions. However, it is received merely as criticism. Navigating these waters is a skill you'll have to develop. One way to do that is to be extremely intentional about the structure of your feedback. Learning these 5 forms of feedback from Art Costa and Bob Garmston can help you become more self-aware.
The trick here is understanding how each form of feedback can be used to impact thinking. The 5 forms of feedback are judgment, personal observation, inference, data, and the thought-provoking question. Judgments use words to broadly rate performances, like, you did a good job.
Personal observations focus more on the specific preferences of the person giving the feedback, like, I really liked it when you told the student to expand on her point.
Inferences use more vague nouns and verbs that have to be interpreted, like, your students were able to collaborate a lot today.
Data refers to fact-based, objective feedback. This could be quotes of what was said or numerical values of what was seen and heard. Like 4 out of 14 students had enough time to finish the exercise.
Lastly, thought-provoking questions are designed to empower the teacher to consider their own options and opinions. The purpose is to focus the teacher's thinking on potential solutions, like when you consider the data on how long it took students to finish this exercise, what are some factors you might consider when setting the allowed time?
Now let's use each of these forms of feedback to work through a conversation focused on student engagement during a Zoom session. Seth, I observed your Zoom lesson today, and I thought it was great.
Thanks.
I really liked the way you modeled what you expected the students to do on the assignment.
Thank you. I'll make sure I do that again next time.
Great! I see that most of your students completed the assignment, but I don't think all of them were fully engaged with the content.
Oh, really? Oh, what makes you say that?
Well, I noticed that 6 of the 24 students in your Zoom classroom either were not visible on the screen or did not have their camera on.
I really need to work on that. Honestly, I didn't even notice it while I was teaching.
That makes sense. You were really focused on the lesson. What are some ways you could encourage students to keep their cameras on so we can better replicate a face-to-face setting?
That's a good question. I actually really like it when I can see their faces so I can tell when they have questions or don't get the point. Maybe I could ask them to make a physical motion that relates to the content.
Yes, using body language could really help you see the engagement of your students.
Yeah, exactly.
In this example, I used data and questions to help Seth form his own judgments, personal observations, and inferences. The teacher left the conversation with a concrete plan to improve student engagement during Zoom lessons, a plan that was his own idea. Pay special attention to the importance of data and thought-provoking questions. Often, teachers presented with these will be more critical of themselves than you would be. Show the facts, raise the question, and give teachers the space to answer it.
Now, let's talk about coaching.
Just because when I'm giving feedback doesn't mean it's going to be negative feedback. We always look for 2 positives to include before we give any type of feedback. It may be directed with questions in regards to why they're doing something we may not be too sure about. And it would also educate us to why they're doing what they are doing. So it's more so a mutual conversation, questioning involved, asking them for the big picture. And then at the same time, when we're giving feedback, our goal is to walk out of there as administrators, or at least my assistant principal and I, with a couple tools in our toolbox so we can share what we saw in one classroom with another teacher who it may be useful for. So it's important to go in there just understanding this isn't an evaluation piece. The feedback is more so a coaching piece. But at the same time, we're being coached as well as administrators on possibly some new teaching strategies that we're not too familiar with, or new engagement strategies that we can share with others.
The best coaches don't talk at you, they talk with you. It's a conversation. Let's highlight 3 specific skills you can build to make conversation with teachers become more productive: paraphrasing, pausing, and posing thoughtful questions.
Paraphrasing is when you capture the essence of what the other person is saying so they know you understand them. Watch how this paraphrase captures the thinking of the educator.
Point now where I'm like, just finish it. Like, let's just finish it, check whatever boxes need to be checked, and let's be done. And then there's this guilt of, but is that really what they need? Is that what's best for them? So I'm stuck.
So you're a little frustrated because the program is not what it was billed to be.
Yes.
And what you would like is really to be a resource to make sure you take care of them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Pausing is another skill that is too often overlooked. It allows you to listen before forming your next question, and it creates space for others to think beyond their initial answer. Sometimes the best thing to say is nothing at all.
Support for them and
Yes.
the teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And it's interesting because the lead mentor that reached
In this clip, a pause was enough to encourage the educator to keep thinking.
We already touched on the importance of asking questions, but let's go deeper. Not all questions are truly thought-provoking. Sometimes they function more to interrogate someone. The difference is in the words chosen as well as the tone of your voice. Your goal should be to create a safe place for the teacher to think. Try asking questions that begin with how or what. Avoid asking questions that start with why. You don't want teachers to feel interrogated. Use language that explores multiple options with plural forms and tentative language like some, might, and could. Another tip is to frame your questions with the assumption that the teacher already explored data or considered options. This might sound like, what are some things you learned while brainstorming strategies to keep your students engaged online? Or, when your PLC explored the fluency scores of your class, what were some of the things you noticed?
tell me if you would, how do you feel that you did this last time that you trained?
Mediocre, if I'm going to be honest.
Okay.
Each teacher is different. Some of my teachers, you can say, hey, what are you doing? And that's what they need. Some of your teachers, you really have to coddle a little bit more. And you as a good leader, you know what each teacher needs. You know how to talk to each teacher, and you know what they need. That's not something that you can really teach another administrator or another leader. You have to just get to know your people. You have to know what works and what motivates and what people need. You have to know that. That's not a survey that you can give out. That's just you interacting and conversating and getting to know your people. You're not going to have all the answers for your teachers right now, or for your students, and just listening, because they're frustrated at times, and they don't necessarily want you to have all the answers. They just want you to listen to them and just to know that you're there to support them. So I'm a fixer, and so that's been kind of difficult for me because I really wanted to be able to do everything I can for them, and that's not something you can really do right now. Pretty much all you can do is just listen and provide that support for them.
Have you ever looked at someone and asked yourself, what the heck were they thinking? Sometimes it's hard to understand why people act the way they do. We started this video by acknowledging that every person has their own source of truth. Let's expand on that idea. This is the ladder of inference. It explains how personal beliefs impact what someone sees and hears, and how that information goes on to influence their actions. Understanding how beliefs, experiences, and assumptions can control behavior is critical to provide better feedback and coaching for teachers.
For example, if a teacher believes that English language learners are going to struggle in school, that belief impacts not only how he teaches science to those students, but also what he observes as he watches those ELL students learning in his class.
Don't forget, this ladder of influence applies to you, too. Before giving feedback, take an honest inventory of the beliefs you hold about the teacher, the subject, and your own idea of what education should be. Test those assumptions rigorously by giving your teachers genuine opportunities to challenge them.
Providing high-quality feedback and coaching to teachers is key to their professional growth, and it's also central to making sure a school can continuously improve.
Whether in a traditional setting or a remote learning environment, your role in providing intentional feedback designed to help teachers think is essential in impacting teaching and learning.
Well, thank you both for joining us today. And my name is Seth Brown, and I'm here with NCPAPA primarily to help facilitate this conversation around coaching and the role of feedback in facilitating growth for teachers, especially here in a remote learning environment. So the way this is going to work is literally this will just be a conversation really to get voices from the field, because you two really matter to us here at PAPA and with DPI and NC and all of our partnerships, or all of our partners, just to make sure that we have sort of the good voices of how to make this real in our schools today. So the first question is this: what are some ways you develop a culture of coaching and feedback for growth at your schools?
So having served at 5 different schools, I've been at the elementary level. I was there for 11 years. At the middle school level, this is my second year. Some things are definitely consistent, and one of the ways that I start building that culture is whenever I'm assigned to a new school. And generally that's always been in the summer. That's always kind of convenient. But during the summertime, I will schedule individual one-on-one appointments with every single staff member in the building. And during that time, it's very relaxed. I ask a few questions. I ask about them personally as well as professional, what has been their experience. And then I kind of dig a little bit into what do you think that we do well at our school? What are some areas that you think that we could improve overall at the school? We also talk about individual strengths and weaknesses at that point, or areas of concern of what they would professionally like to have feedback on as part of growth. And part of that is just building that relationship piece. In my first year as a principal, that is the most crucial part of what I'm doing as their principal, is I have to build that relationship of trust so that risk can be taken. And so whenever they get ready to leave, and I feel like a broken record because I say it at every single meeting, and I share with them at the end of this year, my goal is for us to have a relationship where we can take risks together. And that means that you drop by my office one day and say, Desiree, I've got something I want to try. And I'm always going to be willing to support you and say, okay, what can I do to support you? And after you take that risk, one of 3 things will happen. Either all parts of it worked, some of it worked, or none of it worked. And that's okay, because then I'll say, what now? And on the flip side of that, it's a relationship to where I can go to my staff and say, I'm thinking about trying something new, but I need your support. And I also want to know that at the end of it, some of it may work, all of it may work, or none of it may work, and that you're not going to judge me. So it's more of a relationship of trust, and there's no judgment there whenever we don't always have those successes every single time that we may think, but it's about building that relationship of taking risks together as a team. So the first year is the most crucial part of building the relationships for coaching.
Thank you very much. And Titus.
Well, for the past 6 years, I am a fan of Stephen Covey. And one of the second habits, when you look at his 7 habits, is to begin with the end in mind. So the past 6 years, I've actually taken that second habit and flipped it as it relates to school leadership. So when you look at it throughout the entire year, everything we do culminates to these end of year assessments. So we spend the entire year trying to get students to grow. And once the tests are taken, once the tests are scored, what can we do about it except begin to prepare for the next year? So we took Stephen Covey's second habit and we flipped it. So basically, as I lead, we end with the beginning in mind. So test scores are in, EVAS data is on the way. And what my challenging question is to my staff as we end a year and as we begin the new one, we begin to set new targets. There's a cliche that says if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. So we're looking at student growth, but we also need to establish targets for our teachers. So we end the year thinking about, okay, next year, what do you want to accomplish? Next year, what do you want to do? So we go ahead and front load goals. We go ahead and we front load objectives. And then we actually craft our school professional development model based on what the teachers share that they want to learn to do. So when March came and students went home, I automatically knew that this current year had to be a year where we focus primarily on teaching and learning. So we started our school under Plan B, students in the building 2 days per week, remote the other 3. And then we had a group of 100% remote. So we knew automatically we had to do what we needed to do in order to maximize the time we were in the school building. So we've been coaching since day one. So when we talk about coaching, that's exactly what we do. We end with the beginning in mind. We establish targets, we establish goals, we establish what we're aiming for. And then what we do is we just craft professional development based on the goals the teachers shared that they want to achieve, whether that's increasing student engagement in the classroom, whether that's integrating technology in a more effective way. We coach. And not only do we do that, we bring in people to help us do it. We take teachers who are doing a great job of doing it and use them to empower other staff. But this has been a coaching year for myself and my assistant principals.
Thank you. It really sounds like for both of you, really sounds like that being proactive is key. Being proactive, Desiree, in forming those trusting relationships. Being proactive, Titus, in really knowing where you ended so you know where to begin the next year. And really the teachers are a key part of that for both of you, I think. And Desiree, you were saying.
Yes, if I could add on, I really appreciated what he said. I think I'm going to take that about the beginning, with the beginning with the end in mind and shifting that. I really like how you said that. We also do that whenever we have our evaluation meetings at the end of the year. I ask my staff, let's go ahead and think about what you want your PDP goals to be rolling into the next school year. So they're already kind of thinking about what their growth and points could look like. And so you're already facilitating that individual piece. And then, like he said, bringing staff in the summertime to create a school improvement team overall goal. So we bring in our school improvement team. We look at our data. We look at where we are. we talk about our successes, but where are some areas that we can grow? And then we craft an overall school goal so that our PDPs are not only driving our school reflection, but also that individual reflection as well. It's interesting how whenever you talk to teachers about some of that coaching pieces, it's interesting to me how if you look at 95% of your teachers, they know exactly what they need to improve on. I don't have to tell them that. They already know. I think that's what's beautiful about being in that leadership role is you just get to sit there and say, how can I support you? And, asking those questions and guiding that reflection. I really liked what you added, Titus. Thank you.
Thank you. And the other thing too, is it sounds like we're using the system set up in NESIS, right? Where you go through the whole cycle, in the end, you set sort of that end of year plan, and then, all right, so how do we then continue it on? So it's using what's already set up and really just kicking it up a notch, focusing on trust, relationships, and then using the data to set a goal for the next year.
Exactly. And one thing I've learned is sometimes we spend a lot of time, effort, and energy trying to reinvent the wheel. There's really no need to reinvent the wheel. And what we have to be strategic and intentional about is identifying the persons in your building who do things well, and then giving them the opportunity to showcase what they do and what they do well. Because listen, teachers, we steal ideas or borrow ideas, however you want to use it. And then one thing I've been intentional about is just creating a culture of collegiality within our building where we don't have to bring somebody in for professional development, because we have professionals in our building who can help us develop everything that we need. Now, when we have to go outside the house to grab something or to be empowered, we do that. But for the most part, we have excellent and amazing and effective people in the buildings, which we need to empower. And you mentioned NESIS. Well, if you look at the continuum from proficient to accomplished on many of those standards, it's just the leadership piece. And as principals, we have to provide those opportunities for our teachers to become leaders in our building, especially in this age of technology. You have teachers who do what they do excellently. Empower them to share what they know with other staff members.
Thank you. That's actually, Titus, a great segue into our next question, which is, how do you differentiate between coaching a teacher for growth and evaluating them on the NESIS rubric?
Well, if I could start first, I love cliches. I love quotes. Man, feedback is the breakfast of champions. So the tool in and of itself is nothing but an instrument that allows feedback, and the quality of your feedback either shuts the door or opens the door for coaching. So when you're giving that feedback, it's either going to cause a teacher to shrink back, shut the door, and shut you out, or you could craft that feedback in such a way where a teacher becomes hungry for improvement, becomes hungry with a desire to want to do what they do better. Our motto at every school I go to, I have a motto. And since this is my second year at Shelby Intermediate, and when I got there last year, the motto was from good to greater, with a capital E and a capital R. So even if we're great, we have to recognize there is potential to be greater. So one thing that we've done at our school is we've created a desire, or we've tried to catalyze a desire within everybody to, even if you're good, let's be better. Even if you're great, let's be greater. So the feedback that you use to provide to teachers, that is a excellent, amazing tool to use to create that opportunity to coach, because you have to, in order to be coached, you have to be coachable. And the way we craft feedback can influence whether a teacher wants to be coachable or not, So it's a great tool. You just have to be effective with how you craft and package the feedback you give.
Thank you. Desiree.
Whenever I think about feedback versus evaluation, it's interesting to me. Feedback to me sounds like I'm telling someone else something, but I actually don't do it that way. Feedback to me is where I ask questions and I facilitate thinking or reflection on a teacher's part. It's not so much the direction. You know, I'm not very big on saying you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's more or less we sit down and we have a conversation together, and I ask a series of questions. Sometimes they're the same questions that I may ask of any teacher, and then I add in a few that may be specific to that teacher, but it's about guiding their reflection process. It's not about my reflection. It's not about my classroom. It's about helping them to see and take ownership in what's going great and the little things that they still want to craft and improve on. As far as the evaluation tool, I can remember whenever I first started out as principal, and we actually shifted the evaluation instrument not long after I became principal. And I really like the instrument. I like the rubric piece of it. But what I think is more important about the rubric is not, again, that I sit there and I mark the rubric. I don't do it that way. I sit down with each teacher and it takes a very long time. I mean, I'm talking an hour to an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours, depending on how deep you get into the rubric. But every year at the end of the year, I send out a series of reflection questions. I give them the rubric and I ask teachers, when you come in to meet with me together, I want both of us to look at this rubric, and together we decide where do you feel like you are? Where do you feel like you've grown? What are your celebrations? And we make little notes on the rubric, and then I actually enter it in together with that teacher, because the evaluation piece, I think, is only as good as the ownership that can be taken from it. If I just mark it for a teacher and give it to them, that I'm owning it, not them. And so it's about having this conversation pieces with the teacher of, oh, okay, so you did a great job with parent involvement this year. And maybe it's even celebrating, how can you share that with other staff? Or what are some things that you want to continue to grow in as far as your content? So it's asking those guiding questions and pieces of reflection, I feel like is more of a coaching. And the evaluation tool helps us to do that. But again, in a way, it's not so much the direction as much as we're asking those questions that help to guide what folks are thinking and how they can continue to grow and improve.
Thank you.
Indeed. And you know what? One thing I was too thinking, Desiree, as we discuss those things and as teachers begin to establish goals, there has to be an accountability component to it. So one thing that I've been intentional about this year is actively listening to what the teachers say and then holding them accountable, most of the time with an assignment, which means you said this, thus by this date, I would like to see you create some form of product, which is evidence that you've reached for a specific goal. For example, many of our staff, we wanted this year with some of our students remote, some of our students face-to-face. I wanted teachers to work smarter, not harder, because March through June last year was a challenge. So this year we were going to work smarter. So one thing that I did was I modeled for our teachers what I wanted to see as it related to the flipped classroom approach. So our media specialist introduced me to Loom. So once I was introduced to Loom, I used Loom to front load information to our teachers. And then I gave our teachers an assignment. I gave them 3 weeks to create a Loom where they could front load content to their students to do on their remote days. And so part of that coaching is to model, not just sit and evaluate and talk about goals, but model it so your teachers could see it. And then some teachers, they loomed other tech tools and sent that. So we actually have a Google folder with tech tools that some of our teachers have showcased different forms of technology. So the modeling component has to be there as we discuss goals, as we discuss what do we do with this feedback, because feedback without an action plan is null and void. It's a moot point. So another cliche, the manifestation of learning is accountability. You know what I'm saying? So the manifestation of learning is application. So we have to give teachers an opportunity to apply what they've learned. So when it comes to those goals, let's give them something to apply, which means, okay, now let's put some action steps to those goals. And then as a leader, I have to hold you accountable to do what you said you were going to do.
Thank you. It really is neat because both of you talk about the evaluation, not as sort of an old school, and I'm talking maybe hopefully really old school where, you know, it's a form filled out and put in a box and you sign it and get it back and that's the end of it. Both of you really talk about using the evaluation piece as the instrument to either to challenge or push someone through accountability, to model some best practices and behaviors, to really sit down and invest time in them as another person to talk about their goals and get their feedback. And really that's one of the key goals, it sounds like, and how you both use the evaluation actually to coach a little bit as well. Yeah.
You know, the observation piece, and maybe I go about it differently, but whenever I look at an observation, so at the beginning of the year, I have a training with all of my staff, and usually what I will do is I will actually put up the principled evaluation instrument, and I'll say, all right, let's go through, and I would like to see how you would evaluate me. And what's interesting is they all want to put you a lot higher than what you are. And what's interesting is because you're, you know, whenever you are assigned to a different building, you start at the bottom again, because you have to continue to build from what you have, but yet you're starting at ground zero no matter where you are. And so I talk to teachers about every year is a brand new year for me, as much as it is for you as well. And so we look at that instrument and we talk about what it looks like to have that consistency and how that we have to see things over time. And it's not just a snapshot, it has to be something that we see over time. And I may not always see that going into a classroom. So observation to me, whenever I am writing up an observation, I typically do not put anything negative in an observation. Here's why. 95% of my teachers, again, they know what they're great at, and they also know what they're not necessarily as good at, what their, you know, areas of concern are. And for me to actually put that in writing on an observation can be detrimental to our relationship. And so what I prefer to do is that whenever a teacher comes to me and we chat before the observation, I'll say, what would you like some feedback on? Is there anything you want me to look for whenever I'm coming in to see you at any point in time? And generally they have great ideas of what they would like feedback on. And then whenever we meet to actually go over the observation, I'll talk about all of the positive things that I want to share. And as I'm asking the questions afterwards, because once it's on paper and it's in the computer, there's more of a relief of, okay, she thinks that I'm okay. She thinks I'm a good teacher. And very rarely have I come across a person who just really wasn't meant for education. Every one of us, we are salvageable and we have good strengths that we can bring to a team. And that's what I look for in every single teacher is how can I find their strengths and how can they be, a success with all of their teammates. So that being said, whenever we finish the observation piece, then at that point in time, it's time for more of that reflection piece where I can say, so what do you think is going well? What do you think is going well for you? What do you think is going well for your teammates? What do you need more support on? What would you like more professional development on? It's that point in time, those conversations are the ones that are important. Now, if I have a teacher who might be struggling and trying to figure out what that looks like, and maybe they're caught on the spot and they can't really tell me anything, then at that point in time, I'm not going to put it in observation, even though I might know a few things they could work on. I'll follow up with an email, because an email is documentation as well. But I might say, I enjoyed our conversation today. I know that you're still trying to think about maybe something else you really want to dig into. Let's chat again at the end of the week and let's talk about some other ways that you want to continue to build and grow in your classroom. So I use the observation and evaluation instrument in a very positive way. And I really try not to focus on those, I guess maybe negative or concern. If I have to bring up something that I might say, why don't we talk about this? Then I would do that more face to face, not necessarily in writing, because they need to know that we all have areas we want to grow in. And generally, whenever they tell me an area, I'll say, why don't you go down and visit so and so? They really do a good job at that. And then before they leave, I will say, do you know how you're really good at classroom management? Would you mind if another teacher came down to watch you? Because it validates the fact that they have strengths, but then also gives them an opportunity to learn and grow from others. That's what I love about leadership, is helping everyone come together as a team.
So Desiree, it seems like one of the critical things is using that trust you talked about earlier, and then getting feedback from teachers on what they want to grow on. And then really the observation is the piece where you collect data, and then you ask the questions to help them reflect. So that way you don't necessarily have to say you're good at this or bad at this. It's just you giving them data and they can make their own decisions as you go through. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and if you listen, what I heard as Desiree was sharing, relationship matters. We talk so much about how the effectiveness of a teacher is tied to the extent that that teacher develops a relationship with those students. Whereas a principal, my effectiveness as a leader is directly influenced by how my teachers perceive me. So relationship matters. So I love the fact that she shares, she tries to avoid putting negative comments in the observation. And one effective strategy to do that is to frame all of your concerns as a question. At Cleveland Early College High School, where I served as principal prior to my current assignment, we were expeditionary learning school, and we always used a I notice, I wonder note catcher, and I just applied that to my leadership principles. So when I see anything that's questionable during the write-up and the observation, I noticed, and then I'll bring it up, and then I'll follow that with a question. I wonder. And what that does is it opens up the floor for dialogue where that teacher can share his or her perspective, which could highlight a context that I'm totally unaware of. It gives a teacher an opportunity, and then it gives me an opportunity to sort of provide a challenge to that perspective or provide an alternative to that perspective. But it creates dialogue, and it's not punitive in the sense of you did something the principal did not like, but it opens up the floor for dialogue.
For sure. Thank you. And really what I'm going to do is move along just a little bit and get into the fact that we're in a remote learning environment. So what are some differences that you all have noticed in coaching teachers in a remote learning environment compared to face-to-face?
If I can start, one thing that I've tried to make or help my staff understand, I trust them. I am not a micromanager. Steve Jobs said, why hire smart people and tell them what to do? So I trust my teachers. My assistant principals and I, we provide the frame, we provide the boundaries. My curriculum technology coordinator, my media specialist, we craft, my department chairs, we craft the boundaries. And we say, listen, be effective, work smart, not hard. And pretty much when I recognize that teachers are working too hard, we'll intervene and try to coach a little bit, because listen, I'll be honest, teachers are stressed. Teachers are working extremely hard. So as a leader, I've challenged myself to try to provide an atmosphere which lightens the load that's on their shoulders. Thus, I am not going to allow you to wear yourself out, because when you wear yourself out, you become grouchy. And when you become grouchy, you fuss at students. And when you fuss at students, parents get upset. When parents get upset, they don't call you, they call me. So I want to stay in my happy place. So I want teachers to work smarter, not harder. And I'm gonna be honest, if someone tells you that this is not a challenging job, running a school, teaching, being an educator in the midst of a pandemic, I will tell you they are not being honest. So salute to every North Carolina educator, salute to every United States educator, salute to every educator worldwide who's having to deliver content and instruction and try to grow kids in the midst of a pandemic. So salute to every educator.
Thank you, Titus. Desiree, thoughts on that?
So I guess the first thought that comes to my mind, and I love everything that you said, Titus, you hit the nail on the head about trusting your teachers. And that's something I try to say in almost all of my PLC meetings. I trust you to go out there and do what you need to. And whenever they'll ask me a question, a lot of times I'll throw it right back at them. Well, what are you thinking? And sometimes they'll look at me and I don't know if I really want to tell you what I'm thinking, but I'm gonna put it out there. And a lot of times I'll say, I agree with you. I think that's a great idea. And you see the relief, but it also lets them know I am the professional and she supports me in what I'm doing. The hardest piece about this remote, and I guess part of it is because I'm such a people person, is not being able to see my teachers as much as I like to. That's been the most difficult challenge to me, not seeing my teachers and not seeing my students as much as I would like to. So I will say that whenever I have a coaching moment, I make sure that I either walk down to that teacher's classroom or they come by and visit with me and we sit down together face to face. I need that time. My teachers need to be able to see me and I need to be able to see them. And so making sure that I don't just resort to this virtual world where I'm going to have a conversation with you about your observation online. I don't want to resort to that. I want to still have that personable, face-to-face opportunity where, we can chat about personal things and we can, share with each other about things that we're concerned about and celebrate together, but it's just having that opportunity together. Also thinking about the remote environment piece. He said it very, very well when he talked about how teachers, they came in the gate and they thought, we're going to teach just like we did when there was not a pandemic. And so I kept telling my folks, and I had to tell them almost every single time we would have a faculty meeting, I need you to whoa up. I need you to breathe. I need you to just stop and relax and realize you're doing great things. They needed almost more this year than any other year. They needed to hear that they're doing a great job. And I think that's all they want to hear. They want to hear, am I doing okay? Am I doing okay? I know it's not the best. We all know it's not the best, but am I doing okay? Am I doing what you want me to do? Our teachers, they want to know that we're proud of them and they need to hear that. So it goes right into just celebrating all of the successes whenever we can. I feel like I've had a lot of food this year. We brought in a lot of food for teachers, and every time I talk about the successes that we've had, we talk about where we started at the beginning of the year, where we are now, all the baby steps that we took. And so it's continuing it's nurturing. Being a principal is being a nurturer. I feel like their mama. I'm trying to take care of them, and it's not just their professional life, but it's also just making sure of their well-being as well. So I feel like that's been the most difficult part of remote teaching and learning, is not having that interaction as often as we usually do. So I really try to make sure that whenever I have the opportunity, I'm face to face with them so that we can see each other and we have that physical connection.
Now, me personally, I give my teachers options. So I have some faculty members who are perfectly okay with face-to-face, and we have our masks, and so they come to the office and we dialogue. I have some teachers, they want Zoom. So we'll set up a Zoom link or a Google Meet, and we'll correspond and discuss that way. And then on Wednesday remote days, I'm like, listen, if you want to, call me on the phone. So I give the teachers the opportunity to tell me how they want to interact, how they feel most comfortable. But we do create those opportunities. And I'm a high touch principal. I'm very I want to be there. So within reason, you're going to see me. I may just come in the classroom, not because I'm evaluating you. I just want to be around you. So students, staff, sometimes I just go, one of my teachers, she has the most comfortable rocking chair. So I will go in there and just plop in the rocking chair. And, maybe I'm finishing someone else's observation, but just for me, I just want to be there. So as often as opportunity allows that human interaction, we have to figure out how to make that happen. And in this remote environment, it's a challenge, particularly for teachers who are used to seeing their students, touching their students. You know, my remote teachers, I have 6 of them in my building. I mean, imagine how they feel going to a classroom and there's no students in there, but yet they're still teaching like their hair's on fire. That does something to their psyche, you know. But once you see the Zoom screen open up and you see all those little faces, you can see the smile on their face, but it's nothing like going into a classroom, seeing your little people. So just like Desiree, I feel it's part of my responsibility to protect my teachers mentally, emotionally, and socially. So I'm gonna be honest. Um, I'm a coach, I'm a supporter. So I go back and forth between cheerleader and coach.
Yeah. It's really sounds like that human interaction is something that's very important for both of you to hold on to in a remote learning environment. And really, no matter whether it's a face-to-face conversation, it's a Zoom conversation, or even a phone call, it's the connections that are really valuable for you as a principal as you coach and support your teachers, especially during this crazy time that we're in right now. So thank you very much. So speaking of that, growth is something that we've all had to do, especially over the last several months. I mean, there's been so much room to grow and learn, and really as school has changed. So what are some of the differences you have noticed in coaching teachers in a remote learning environment? I'm sorry, what are some ways you are determining the needs for professional growth of your teachers in this remote learning environment?
Well, one, we need to grow extremely because those reams of paper we're going through like water. I'm like, if we're one-to-one in digital, why are we using so much copy paper? So one area of growth is for us to figure out how to decrease our consumption of copier paper. I'm being facetious, but really, man, we're going through paper like water. So just getting teachers to um, create methods of engagement that are digital. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, we want to use the technology, but the technology has to be more than an electronic notebook. So, just trying to create awesome ways to enhance student engagement. And one way we've done that, another assignment I gave our teachers, some do it amazing, but Flipgrid. So I've noticed our introvert students who, when they were face to face, I never heard them talk. But listen, give them an assessment, whether it's formative or summative, and let them articulate it verbally through Flipgrid. Man, I'm like, wow, I never knew that you could think on that level. So we, you know, just getting teachers to recognize, okay, let's be creative as we want to be. Your principal is okay with that. Try something new, do something you've never done, get out of the box, evolve. And one thing I challenged my teachers with earlier is that in this age of education, you do not want to be a 8-track or a cassette tape teacher as we move into this new digital space. So I said, right now, I think we have the best of both worlds. You need to perfect face-to-face teaching, and you need to perfect digital. So let's just kill 2 birds with 1 stone, because should the world turn and everything go digital, guess what? You're the bomb, because we took advantage of the opportunity to perfect our craft in the off season. Therefore, because the worst feeling in the world is for you to try to make adjustments in the middle of the game, you know, because sometimes the champion is not the best team. It was just the team that was most prepared.
Thank you.
Well stated. Um, so we obviously knew from our school improvement team meetings in the summer, some areas that we needed to grow in technology, of course. That was the big picture that we needed to look at. And so looking at teacher experience, teacher expertise, surveys, sending out surveys and getting feedback from staff. We crafted multiple days where teachers could come in small groups and work together. They also utilized that time to work technology-wise on their pacing guides, and what technology tools they could utilize with that. So providing, you know, some of that up front before we ever even walked into the building in August. We started this in July. So we started then. And then, of course, we continued. I'm sure they're tired of us asking, what else do you need? What else do you need? What do you want more learning, as far as technology tools? And there's so much out there. But we also had to provide some consistency, because I was afraid that my staff were going to get so overwhelmed and think, oh, I've got to do this and I've got to do this one and this one, and it just be not something that's consistent across our district. So we really kind of streamlined in the beginning, and then now we've kind of expanded and said, if you would like to explore some more, you can. But again, we facilitate gathering that feedback individually when we're observing. Whenever we're in PLC meetings weekly, we ask them those questions, and then also written surveys. So we have a lot of information that we're gathering. And as we continue to gather that information, we share back out opportunities that they can learn as a group, or they can learn by themselves online. We have other, tech tools that send out information. So that's kind of how we gather. And we're still gathering. I suspect that we will for the remainder of the year, just to figure out what challenges that keep coming up and how they want to continue to grow and learn.
Thank you.
And Seth, if I could throw in there,
Please.
I'm not sure how many principals ever experience when you transition to a new school, sometimes your leadership style being different from the leader before you. Sometimes there's a mass exodus of current staff. So last year we had a high level of turnover. And I said I wanted the opportunity to mold and shape brand new teachers. So my entire 5th grade, with the exception of 3 teachers, are all 3 years or less, some brand new to teaching in and of itself. And when I tell you they are doing such an amazing job, I'm impressed. But also there was a growth component within me. I wanted to become a better educational coach. So just having the opportunity to provide the feedback, to coach, to show, to demonstrate, to showcase, one, it challenges me to become better, because I do think I'm a good leader, but good is the enemy to great. I want to be better. So those opportunities have been there as well. So we end with the beginning in mind. So last year we already knew some areas that we wanted to improve. Our EVAS data from previous years, we looked at that. We know some targets that we want to hit. And then also, teacher feedback, EVAS data, and then, surveys, just hearing from teachers. What is it that you want to accomplish? So we've used all of those, but ultimately the goal is, will you guys give me an opportunity to get better by coaching you? So that's kind of the twist that I've put on it this year as well.
No, that's because not only are both of you talking about gathering data directly from teachers by asking them, for one thing, you're talking about modeling innovation, right? It's how do you get beyond just paper? You're talking about how do you make sure that you're able to grow yourself? You're talking about how do you make sure that you challenge yourself? And it's not necessarily the years of experience, it's how those teachers are willing to take risk, responsible risk. And move forward, because when you're talking about growth, especially when you're in a new environment, that's one of those things that's key to have. And having a principal that gets your feedback, sort of your input on that, is one of those key things in helping you to grow as a professional. So thank you very much. I think final thing, we've talked a little bit about some success sort of wrapped in there, but just what are some final thoughts for you to wrap up this conversation about coaching, and really anything that would be key for principals to consider in developing this culture of coaching in your school, so teachers and educators continue to grow and continue to learn?
I look at coaching as always highlighting the positive before we ever ask teachers, what would you like to continue to improve on? So again, it's those celebrations. And I feel like this year we've had to have even more celebrations than we have in the past, just because there's so much uncertainty and teachers are worried. Am I doing a good job? And so with those celebrations, we've had a lot of food, but in my daily email, I send out a daily email and I highlight people all over the building and good things that they're doing, not only in their classroom, but what they may do for another staff member. But what I have found is a lot of times teachers appreciate the more personal touch So it might be that I pop by their classroom and I say, you really do a good job at classroom management, or I really appreciated that you brought in that guest speaker today, or thank you for going down the hall and working with that new teacher. I really appreciate your leadership. It's taking that time just to make a quick, simple statement. They appreciate that, as well as a written note. That does take time, but I have had teachers who have shown me years after I even left, I still have that note you gave me. And so it's worth me taking the time to write out that note rather than just even sending an email. Just taking that time of saying, I'm proud of you. You are a valuable member of our team. And I thank you for all that you do for your students, for your colleagues, for our community. You're a great teacher. Here are some of your strengths. And it's an opportunity to celebrate their success. And they remember those little things. They remember the time that you took to stop by or to write that note. And I think that's what I love about working in education, is the fact that we're all working to help each other and work on our strengths, so that as a team, we make a great team together.
Thank you.
I tell my teachers they are valuable members of a winning team doing meaningful work in an environment of trust. I would encourage, as a final note, every school administrator who will experience this particular Zoom, work your garden. Your school is your garden. My wife is from California, and I'll never forget the first time going home to meet her parents. I was amazed because right there in their backyard was an orange tree, a lemon tree, and a pecan tree. So every morning we were able to go in the backyard, go to the tree, grab oranges or lemons, and come right back in the house and make fresh lemonade or orangeade or orange juice, whatever we wanted to do. Now, I'm from North Carolina. We cannot do that. So if you think about it, if I were to bring oranges, lemons to North Carolina and put them in the ground and nothing grows, I cannot blame the seed. It's the soil. So even the teacher who you think cannot or is not, it might not be that teacher. It just may be the soil that they're in. So we have to create an atmosphere conducive for growth. We always talk about growth, but we fail to remember that sometimes we have to work the soil a little bit in order to get the growth that we want. We're blaming the seed, but it may not be the seed at all. It just may be the soil. So as educational leaders, we have to work the soil of our school. And teachers who we think can't, you can put that same teacher in a different school, in a different environment, and they will flourish. So we need to find out, what will it take to make my people flourish? And we have to work the garden.
So we're going to begin with asking Dr. Mullenix a few questions to understand her perspective on the feedback, coaching, and evaluation, and its importance in teacher growth. So Dr. Mullenix, how would you describe the difference between coaching and evaluation?
Sure. So I think the most important component to remember of this when distinguishing the two is the essence of dialogue that happens. When you're coaching somebody, you are really taking the time to not just speak and regurgitate what you saw them doing in the classroom. You're taking the time to have a conversation. So it's not a one-way sort of track process. It's time for, just as we're sitting here together and we're talking with one another, I'm asking you as the leader of the building, whether I'm the principal, assistant principal, or instructional coach, I'm asking you as the teacher, how did you think that lesson went today? And I'm listening actively while that person, that teacher, is telling me how they think that the lesson went. And then I probe a little bit further with my questioning. And I start really asking them, okay, so what were your strengths and what were your gaps? And I'm asking them, just as we would ask students questions, I'm asking them questions so that they're really having to come up with their own reflective process. And that's important in the coaching piece. I always think about academic coaching and evaluation the same as I would with athletics, right? If I'm running cross country, my cross country coach is going to provide feedback to me on my form, on my times, how I can improve, right? And I'm going to talk to my coach. I'm going to say that was a really tough workout, but I really felt XYZ about it, right? And we're going to talk to each other. And then I'm going to reflect about it, and I'm going to come back and I might converse with my coach again. The same way needs to happen with our school leaders and our teachers. And that really, to me, that dialogue process of listening, engaging, reflecting, coming back, and it not just being a 20-minute follow-up where the leader is saying, okay, I saw you do all these things, great, you got 4s, or whatever it is, that process in this, that it's not just a one shot and you're done, is really the difference between coaching and evaluating.
Great. So as we think about this idea of coaching and evaluation, and thank you so much for making that distinction, what role then does feedback play in that coaching a teacher for growth?
Right. So naturally, we do have an evaluation process, right? We have to have an evaluation process. And in the same way, we have our assessment process for our students, right? That is just a component of how we holistically view our students. It is a component of how we holistically help our teachers and learn where they're at and help them to grow, right? And so naturally, as a process for that, we have our formative feedback and our summative feedback as that evaluation process. But it's really how we're engaging with the teacher in that time that makes the difference between feedback that a teacher is going to take and use for growth versus feedback that a teacher is going to take, stick it in a binder, say, okay, my evaluation is done, and I'm going to keep doing what I've always done because I don't really know what else to do different, right? And I don't really maybe even know what I did well. And so I'm going to just keep doing it. So that feedback process is so important because it is our natural way to help teachers know where their gaps are, how they can improve. And in that time, maybe we're modeling lessons for them. And maybe if we don't have that expertise, then we're asking someone else who can model that lesson to do that. And then we're also continuing that reflective process. That is all part of the feedback role. Again, it's part of that dialogue. If we aren't allowing that engaging to happen, then we're shortchanging ourselves as the leaders, and we're shortchanging our teachers in the process.
So you've described the difference between coaching and evaluation. Now you've done a really good job of explaining to us the importance of that feedback and what the role of that in this process is. So then my next question, Dr. Mullenix, would be about principals and assistant principals. What is their role in this coaching of teachers?
So I mentioned before that I was at the Friday Institute, and a big piece of that is research, right? It is an institution for research. And so as I think about this, I also think about what our research tells us. And Hattie is well known. Many folks rely on Hattie's research. And it's interesting because Hattie's research tells us that the effect size of instructional leaders is greater than the effect size of transformational leaders in terms of student outcomes. So what does that mean for principals and assistant principals with regard to coaching? That means the principal and the assistant principal, those two individuals, whether or not they have an instructional coach or not, take that aside, those two individuals are the lead instructional facilitators for that campus. Now, that doesn't always mean that those principals and assistant principals know every single content area and could teach every standard to fidelity. But what they do know is they know how to listen. They understand how to help support those teachers, and they understand who they can look to provide model lessons and further assistance for those instructional practices if those principals and assistant principals need to rely on other folks to help them out with those teachers. I think principals and assistant principals really have to be cognizant of their tone and their communication style. I think that's important no matter what role we serve in our lives. But I think it's especially important as the instructional leaders of the campus to be transparent and to be humble and to be honest, but to also be helpful in their way of doing that. And that's a craft that I think many principals and assistant principals have in their tool belt. But we all have bad days, right? We have days that are kind of stressful and days that are, may not go as planned. Maybe something catches us, like a parent comes in and has a concern. And then after that, we have to go and provide, an observation in the classroom. But it's really important, no matter what the circumstance is, that the principal and the assistant principal always thinks of themselves in that coaching light. And just as that cross-country runner would probably not stay on the team if their cross-country coach was giving them an extremely hard time and very critical of their running without providing any help to improve their running, in the same way our teachers won't be receptive to that as well. And so it's just important for our principals and our assistant principals to remember that in coaching is also conversation and dialogue. And I know I've said that several times, but I just can't emphasize that enough about the value of it.
So as I think about the assistant principal role and the principal role, I'd like for you, if you would leave a message for our principals about the importance of coaching teachers. Why is it really important? And then also, and you spoke to this just a moment ago about that distinction and being in that coaching role, perhaps maybe anything that they should be mindful of, pitfalls, so that they can be both evaluator and coach.
Sure. So I think a key piece that I would leave principals and assistant principals with regards to the importance of coaching teachers is to always, number one, remember what it felt like to be in the classroom and to be a teacher. We should never be so far removed that we forget what that feels like. We are at a time where we are asking our teachers to step out of what they have known traditionally, and they need to be able to know that they can do that with knowing that they do it with a fail forward approach in their efforts. And that feeling that those teachers have with that is going to come from the attitudes and the postures that our principals and assistant principals are going to have when they interact with those teachers. So I think the most important thing is to remember coaching means conversation, it means dialogue, it means communicating, collaborating, and always staying grounded and remembering what it feels like to be a teacher in the classroom. And if you could touch on the second part that you'd like me to touch on one more time as well.
Great. So just maybe a note of advisement to our leaders to how can they, and you've distinguished between evaluator and coach, how do they, or maybe pitfalls to avoid in terms of, those roles of being evaluator and coach, and can they really be both?
Yeah. So I definitely think North Carolina is unique in our structure for our schools. We have lots of schools that don't have instructional coaches. And so that layer of support is truly beneficial. However, we have a lot of principals and assistant principals who are without those folks. And so they have to serve in that capacity also, and serve as the evaluator as well as the instructional coach of the building. But that can be a very pivotal role for those principals and assistant principals, because they're enabling themselves to provide the evaluation and also have a hands-in or all hands-on approach to providing that crucial conversation feedback to those teachers. So I would say some advice to those school leaders is to continue moving forward with those evaluations as you have to, but always remember that coaching is the most critical component that is truly going to lead toward greater student outcomes. Conversations, dialogue, building that relationship with those teachers, providing a sense of comfort to where the teacher feels that if there are gaps in his or her instructional approach, that the principal is going to provide that support. And if he or she can't provide that support, then that they're going to rely on someone who they know can help with that teacher, and always just staying true and humble in those efforts. I think that's the most important thing. We're all humans. We have learned that since COVID, that this is a time where no matter what somebody knows or has done, that this is still new in some capacity. And so I just think that just remembering those key pieces can really help us to make sure we're building relationships and doing right by our teachers who are in our classrooms.